In this video, I'm going to show you how we can design and build a simple data scraping system using just a Google Sheets file. That's right, just with a Google Sheets file. As you can see on the screen, in this Google Sheets file, we'll have a few columns. The first column is the URL. In this column, we'll provide a list of the URLs that we want to scrape data from. Then the second column is the title, which is the title of that page. And the third column is content, which is the content of that page. So this is the simplest step, where we set up a data scraping system, and we provide a list of URLs. Then it will automatically scrape to get the title and the content of these pages and update them into this Google Sheet file. So that's the simplest form. Basically, what we're going to practice today is 5 small exercises from easy to hard. The first exercise is very easy. We'll scrape a single URL. The second exercise is that we'll scrape data, but with multiple URLs at the same time. Then the third exercise is to continue upgrading from the second exercise, which is scraping multiple URLs and saving, meaning storing the scraped content into the Google Sheets file. Hello, hi everyone. I'm Mindek, and I'm back again. Welcome everyone to this new video of mine. So in the previous video, I introduced to you all a data scraping tool that's both powerful and simple, easy to use, which is FireCrawl. FireCrawl has a lot of features, from scraping data to crawling and kind of like slithering around, to collect data, scrape data across multiple pages of a website, to sitemap and then extract. Extract means extracting information from one or multiple web pages. So in the previous video, I also gave an introduction to FireCrawl already. Basically, FireCrawl. Why did I choose FireCrawl to introduce? Because for those who are new, and maybe have never heard of data scraping, FireCrawl is quite a user-friendly tool to, let's say, get started, to start learning and exploring about data scraping. Later on, maybe, when you actually use it in practice, we'll have many other tool options. Because the limitation of FireCrawl is that it's a bit pricey. For small needs, FireCrawl can still meet them. But for bigger needs, scraping more data and doing it more frequently, then we might have to use other tools. For example, Crawl4AI, which is an open source data scraping tool. So we can install it ourselves and use it completely for free. But to fit the purpose of introducing data scraping to beginners, I'm still using FireCrawl to demo for you so it's easier to understand. Alright, so in this video, we'll continue with this data scraping section, but we'll take it up a notch, make it more advanced. That means we're going to build a fully automated data scraping system using FireCrawl and N8N. Now, N8N is a workflow automation tool, which I've talked about a lot on my channel. In this video, N8N will be the tool, the environment, for me to build the automation flow, so I can transfer data between different applications from one app to another, and to make API calls to FireCrawl. So we'll need to provide it with one or more URLs to scrape that data. So, simply put, the tech stack in this video will include N8N and FireCrawl. Besides that, we'll also need to know a bit about making API calls, and here, specifically, it's about making API calls to FireCrawl. If this is your first time watching my video, you can look for my older videos about N8 and to check them out. So, this video is a part of my RAG application course for enterprise chatbots. The course is expected to launch soon, since I'm still finalizing the course content. Basically, in this course, I'll guide you build a RAG chatbot that we can apply to your business, to your work. This chatbot will answer questions based on a knowledge source, a knowledge base that we provide to it. This knowledge base can be made up of a lot of data. It could be data from your website, from social media, or document files in a folder on Drive, right? So we'll need to know how to collect data from multiple sources in many formats, many different types, and consolidate them into a single database. Then we'll carry out steps like chunk, ing, and breaking down the data into smaller chunks. Then vectorize them into embeddings in a database, and from there, we'll perform searches based on user queries. So before we build a chatbot, we need to have a database for it, right? We need to carry out a step called preparation, which is having a database. One of the sources of databases that small and medium-sized businesses will need is information from the internet in general and information specifically from our business's website in particular. So we need to have a mechanism to scrape data from our own website in an efficient way. Of course, we can always do it manually, which means we go to each website, and then we can use this FireCrawl. We enter each URL into its playground so that we can get data from each page or from multiple pages. That method is manual, and it's not flexible. For example, if later on our website gets updated, right, then we'll need to redo the data scraping process. That's why, in this video, I'll show you how to design and build a simple data scraping system using just a Google Sheets file like the one on the screen. As you can see, in this Google Sheets file, we have a few columns. The first column is URL. In this column, we'll provide a list of the URLs we want to scrape data from. Here, I'm using an example list of products on my website because data scraping is a bit sensitive, so it's not really appropriate for me to use any other website as an example. So, I'll just use one of my own websites to keep things comfortable. Also, just a quick note, with FireCrawl, it's best suited for scraping data from websites with static data. Explained clearly in prior video about FireCrawl, so you can go back and watch it if you want. The second column is title, meaning the page's title, and third is content, which is the content of that page. So this is the simplest step, which is where we set up a scraping system that we will provide with a list of URLs. And then it will automatically scrape to get the titles and the content of these pages and update them into this Google Sheet file. So that's the most basic form. Then after that, we'll upgrade the problem to a more advanced level where we also have a Google Sheet file, but it will have a structure like this. We won't scrape data and enter it directly here. Instead, we'll get the data from these lists of URLs and create a Google Doc file on Google Drive. That Google Doc file will have a document ID and the link to that document ID. So that way, it's more scalable, because if we put everything into the spreadsheet like this, you'll see in a bit that when we scrape the data, it looks a bit overwhelming. But when we switch to a Google Docs file, it's easier to view and work with, and editing is also simpler and easier. Then, besides that, there are also 2 more columns to scrape and what does that mean? It means that when we want to scrape a certain page, we'll change its status to yes, 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 yes. So, when we change the status to yes, then the system, the workflow in N8N, will be triggered, and it will look for the rows, the entries, in this file that we want to scrape data from. Maybe we want to scrape everything, or maybe we just want to scrape a few addresses. Especially after it finishes scraping, then it will change the status to no, meaning it will update the file, this Google Sheet, and it will create doc files, one doc file for each URL. Then it will also update the document ID and the URL of that doc file, and it will update the status of this to scrape to no. That means it has already scraped, and once it's scraped, we don't want to scrape it again. In case we want to update that URL, we just need to change its status back to yes. Then it will scrape the information from this URL again, and it will update the content in the doc file. And the last column is deleted. So, similarly, it also has 2 statuses, yes and no. When we want to delete a file, we'll change it to yes, and it will delete the Google Doc file. In return, the document ID and document URL will be left blank. So in reality, we will also need to handle this, because there might be websites we might not want to use them, don't want to include them. So we'll need to perform the step of deleting, removing that information and deleting it from the database. In summary, in this video, this is exactly what I'm going to guide you to build together: an automatic data scraping system That's very simple, using an interface that's just a Google Sheet with rows like this. And all we need to do is change the status of the columns in here, and it will scrape the data in the background. Okay, switching over to N8N, these are the flows that we're going to build in this video that I'm guiding you through today. At first glance, it might look a bit complicated. It looks complex, but when implemented, it's not. It's pretty straightforward. It's not complicated at all. And actually, I'm also going to rebuild this workflow from scratch and guide you through each step. I'll explain to you how to build the workflow node by node, so it'll be easier for you to follow along. Basically, what we're going to practice today are 5 small exercises from easy to hard. So, the first exercise is very easy. We'll scrape a single URL address. The second exercise is that we'll scrape data, but this time with multiple URLs at once. Then, the third exercise is to continue upgrading from the second exercise, scraping multiple URLs, and saving, that is, storing those scraped contents into a Google Sheets file. The fourth exercise, we continue to upgrade, so instead of saving to Google Sheets, we'll create Google Docs files. That means for each URL, it will be a Google Docs file with the main content being the scraped content from that URL. Then there will be an option for us to rescrape certain URLs. The fifth and final exercise is pretty much the same as the fourth one, and the advanced feature we'll handle here is adding the ability to delete some URLs and some docs files from our database, okay? Alright, let's get started now. So now I'm going to create a brand new workflow so we can build it from scratch together, okay? Alright, first I'll name this tutorial. And let's call it Web Scraping Data Extraction with N8N. Okay, now I'm going to add the first step. I'll set it to manual trigger for convenience, okay? Add the first node as a manual trigger. Alright, now I'm going to do the first exercise, which is to scrape a single URL. Actually, it's not like only now that we're scraping data and have to wait until there are tools like FireCrawl to be able to scrape data. Data scraping has been around for a long time, and in fact, we can scrape data very simply, just with a single HTTP request node. We're going to make this HTTP request to the address of the URL we want to scrape, and it will return the content of that web page. Now I'll give it a try. I'll try it with one of my own websites. Here, I'm using my English website, and I'll try it with the About page, which is the page that introduces myself. As you can see, with this page, there will be some information introducing myself. If we go to the front end, we'll see a very user-friendly interface. But when we make the request through an HTTP request, what will it look like? There are also many other parameters, but here I'll just run right away. I'll execute this step. There, it returns very quickly. And this is the content of the website we just saw, the About page. You can see that it returns the entire content in the format of HTML. So, the website looks very clean, but when you switch to code, it's quite long. It looks all tangled up like this, guys. And if you want to search for information on this page, it's not that simple either. That's because it has many tags. This HTML content is an example from the website, but it can be seen that it is hidden in this entire HTML page. At this time, there are data scraping tools like FireCrawl. It helps us to do the data scraping in a simpler way, as before it would be quite confusing, and you will need to use many tricks for you to extract the data from that website. But now with FireCrawl will turn website into LLM-ready data, meaning it will scrape data from the website and then convert that data into formats that are friendly to LLMs. LLM-friendly actually also means user-friendly. The most LLM-friendly format is Markdown. So, we can also easily see, view, and read it easily. Now I'll move on to the next step, which is making an API call to FireCrawl. Alright, now I'll delete this connection. I'll drag this trigger down. There can only be one manual trigger in the entire workflow, so I have to separate it and create a new one. I'll add a node to edit the field, and then I'll add the URL address here, and I'll copy this address. For example, this URL there, I'll copy this one. Alright, now I'll execute this so it grabs the variable and I can drag and drop it into the next steps. Now I'll have a variable with the value of a URL address. Next, I'll need to add another node. In this node, I'll perform an API call to FireCrawl, so it can access the URL address I provided, scrape the data from that URL, and return the data in an LLM-ready format. Here, it'll be Markdown. Okay. Now, I'll add an HTTP request node, so the configuration for this node will be like this. So we can make an API call to FireCrawl. Here, I'll rename it a bit to make it easier to understand, like scrape a single URL with FireCrawl, bin. To understand how to configure, how to make an API call to a certain tool, we need to go to its documentation, guys. Alright, now I'll go to the FireCrawl documentation. There's quite a lot of information, and FireCrawl also has a lot of features. Like I mentioned in the previous video, I've already introduced the main features of FireCrawl. It is scraping, crawling, mapping, searching, and extracting. But within the scope of this video, today we're going to focus on just one feature, which is scraping or data extraction. So when we go to the documentation, we look for the command in the format of curl. I don't really know how to pronounce this. I don't know how to say it, curl, so I'll just call it curl, okay? So, it looks like this. It starts with curl, and inside is the content of that command, that instruction. Now, it's really simple. We can look here. We can see that the method it uses is post, okay, and the endpoint it sends to is this address, which is api.firecrawl.dev/v1/scrape. Content type is application/JSON. Authorization will be bearer and our API key. Note here, it has to start with bearer, and then add the API key after that. Alright, as for the body, to send along with this request, we'll have two variables. First is URL, which is the address of the website, the URL we want to scrape data from, and second is format. So with this command, it will fetch the data and return it in two formats, Markdown and HTML format. So this is a very basic command to perform data scraping, and the returned result will look like this. So this is the returned result. In a bit, when we go to N8N, it'll probably be easier to understand when we look at it. Here, there's also a lot of information about the different scrape formats, and a lot of other related information. That's it. But for now, to keep things simple, we'll start with a very basic command, okay? I'll copy this and go back to N8N, and I'll look for the import button. This curl one, I'll click here and paste the command I just copied in here, and now I'll just import it. When you import, it'll automatically fill in all the information into the corresponding fields. Now the method has switched to post. The endpoint, the URL has also been updated correctly here. For authentication, it's currently set to none, and it will send the authentication through the header there, so you can see that the header parameter, which is the parameter in the header section, will have a key called authorization, and its value is the bearer, along with this API key. So the API key, just go to your FireCrawl account to find it. For example, here I have this dashboard, then go to the API keys tab. In here, we can create a new API key. I've already created one here, so I'll copy this and go back to N8N to paste it into this API key field. So this API key is something I created just for the purpose, just for this demo video. After this video, I'll delete it. In previous videos, I've also talked about this part a lot, but every time I make a video, I still have to mention this part again, because there might be some of you watching my video for the first time and you might not know yet. Actually, there are two ways for us to add authentication. The simplest way is to send it through the header, like this. The advantage is that after we import the curl, it will automatically configure everything for us, and we just need to enter it here. But the downside is, every time we use the API key, we'll have to enter this API key again. A better way is to save our authentication, so that every time we use it, we just select it. So here, I'll create a new one. It'll be a generic credential type, and then I'll select header authentication. As for this header authentication part, I've already created one called FireCrawl, so you just need to create a new one to configure this. Header authentication is very simple. You only need one field. The key is authorization and its value. Just a note, the value must start with bearer, along with our API key. Now I'll go back to this docs here. So, here, you need to copy both the bearer and the API key in here for it to be correct. A lot of people make the mistake here of only copy-pasting just the API key here, and that will definitely cause an error. The correct format is bearer, with a space, and then the API key, then it will be correct. Otherwise, when you call the API, an error is thrown. That a lot of people make, so keep that in mind. And now I won't save this because I've already created it, because I've already created the header authentication above. Now I don't need to send it through the header anymore, meaning these fields serve the same purpose. So now I'll turn off the send header option. For the send body part, I'll send JSON like this. Here, I need to update this URL. If I want a specific address or to scrape data from a page, I'll update it. Right here, for example, the page I just used looks like this. Copy and paste it here, and then I run it. Scrape data. Here I want it to be a variable, so its value can be changed. So I'll switch it to the expression format. Then I'll lock this and drag and drop the URL from the input on the left into this spot, like that. Now, looking at the preview below, we can see that it has already pulled the correct value. It's showing up right here, but the format still isn't correct. The correct format actually needs to have parentheses around it, meaning this URL address has to be inside these parentheses, then it'll be accurate. Not sure why it keeps adding double quotes for me, yeah. Anyway, this is the correct format, but this method is more suitable when we have a URL. If we want to, let's say, format it more precisely, then we'll need to add a piece of code like this. I've mentioned this in previous videos, but now I'll go over it again, which is JSON stringify. So this function will stringify, meaning it converts the value of this variable into a string, and once it's turned into a string, it will add opening and closing quotes around it. Besides that, if there are any strange characters, it will remove them. For example, a new line character. It might cause an error for this API call, so it will also remove those errors. Here we're going to use this OK. We're going to add this piece of code, JSON, there, that's correct. For formatting, it's returning both, so I guess we'll leave it. Besides that, there are also a lot of other variables we can change, but I'll talk about those next time. Okay, now I'm going to execute this step. There, it runs really fast. Result returned. If you look right, that's the output. We can see already gone to that website. Scrape data, it returns data in Markdown format quite long below HTML format. So, these are the two formats it has returned. I can switch to this schema view to make it easier to see. It will have Markdown and metadata. Here, there's a lot of metadata information. Then, HTML is at the very bottom, where you can switch to JSON format. So, we have a lot of information here. I'll go back here. This table format, as I mentioned earlier, is the simplest API call. But actually, if we go back to this docs section, there's usually a section that explains the API endpoints. When we click here, we'll see all the variables that we can add to this command of ours. For example, here, if it's a full command, it will have a lot of these variables. You can see that they're in this JSON section here, this data section. It could be URL, format, which I just used. Many other variables, main content, include /exclude tags. See, there's a lot of other information too. In here, it also explains what each of those variables is used for and which variables are required. For this request, you only need one required field, which is the URL field. That one is mandatory, while the other fields are optional. You can include them or not. It doesn't matter. The only main content field is set to true by default. Many other tags exist. To get results, read this. Remember the playground. Alright, the playground that's the place where we can test those variables to see what kind of results they return. You can enter the URL here, right, and then you can test it out. These things to see how the returned results differ. From there, you'll know how to configure these parameters so that they return results the way you want. Okay, alright, now I'll go back to M8N, and I'll continue with this. Okay, now the result has been returned, but there's too much information, so now I'll tidy it up a bit and only extract the fields that I need. Here, I'll just take 2 fields. The first field is the title, which is the heading of this page, and the second field is the content of this page, which is content. So for now, I'll just extract these 2 fields. Besides that, maybe I'll grab one more field, which is the original URL, so that later, we'll need to fill it into the Google Sheet. Guys, my Google Sheet will have 3 fields, like this, so I'll take these 3 fields. Okay, the title will be in here. It's in the metadata section. I can search. I'll type title here. There, so there are quite a few titles, but here I'll take the title. That's actually the main title. Alright, content. I'll delete this and go back here. The content is this markdown. This is the content-off website. It's been extracted and returned in markdown format. So here's all the content. Okay, for the URL, I'll just take this URL address. I'll also search for URL here. Here, so this is the URL. I'll grab it here, there, and now I'll run it. After it goes through this node, it will only return to us the fields that we actually need. The unnecessary fields we'll just skip. So we've just completed a simple data scraping flow. Here, we'll give it a URL, and it will process that URL. Okay, now, in the next part, we'll continue to upgrade this problem to make it a bit harder, which is, we won't just process one URL, but we'll process multiple URLs. We will take the list. These URLs are in a Google file, sheet, then we will make the API call. Go to all these URLs to scrape data. With the returned data, we will take out. The 2 fields are title and content, so we can update this Google Sheet file. It was after then we run this flow. It will automatically fill in the information on these websites for us. Okay, here I'll also briefly talk a bit more about the URLs on a website. My website right now is a WordPress site. So after you install an SEO plugin, it will automatically generate a sitemap for your website. So what is a sitemap? A sitemap contains all the web pages on your website. You can configure it to only include the content, the web pages you want, in your sitemap, because this sitemap is used by search engines, search tools like Google, to crawl and recrawl, meaning it will go through your posts. These pages, then, products, images, and archives on your website. So everything we include in the sitemap will be picked up by search engines like Google. They'll fetch the data and index it, so they can return results to users whenever we search for related queries. For example, with my website, this sitemap currently has 4 sub-sitemaps. First, a sitemap for posts. Second, for pages. Third, for the products on my website. Fourth and last, for categories. The categories for the posts. I'll show you quickly. The first sitemap is for posts. List out all the posts on my website. Second is pages, so it will list out all the main pages on my website. For example, about, FAQ, home, and contact. Third is products, so it will list out all the products currently available on my website. We can see that these URLs all have a very similar structure. They start with the domain, then /products, then another / for the address, the slug of each product. Finally, there's the category. So this is, on my website with the posts, the blog posts are divided into 10 different categories. So this is basically the sitemap of a website built with WordPress. Actually, we can go to this sitemap to get the list of all the posts or products on our website. In case you have configured it properly, products. Copy and paste them into a Google Sheet file. I'll put them in here, and the image field and the last modified field aren't necessary, so I can delete them. So here, I already have a way to get all the addresses of the URLs on my website that I want to scrape. Similarly, I can also get all the blog posts on my website. Here I only have a few, about 10 blog posts, but for you guys, you might have hundreds of blog posts. So this is a way for us to all the blog posts or any information on the website of ours. From there, we'll build a scraping system for data, which will go through all these URLs one by one and collect information from them to create a database. Then from that database, we can provide it to the AI so that next time it writes an article, it will have the context, the background or information about past events we participated in. Basically, it will have the context, the background to write new blog posts or new social media posts that are more relevant, because right now, if we ask the AI to write, it lacks context. Now, if we need to write a blog post about a new event or some new piece of news, but this new piece of news or new event is actually related to those old news and past events. So this is exactly a way for us to collect data and provide relevant information so it can generate relevant results for our business. All right. Now let's get back to N8N, so I'll go ahead and disconnect the manual trigger node to create a new one. I can actually reuse a lot of the nodes from above, but for now, add a new node, which is Google Sheet, so that I can pull a list of those URL addresses from the Google Sheet file. Here, it's going to be the Get Rows and Sheet option. Guys, there, go in and you'll select the appropriate Google account. Just select the resource it is. For Sheet with this team, the operation will be Get Rows. For Document, you can either find the file, or you can enter it by its URL or ID. Here, I'm going to use the URL. I'll copy and paste it here, and for the sheet, I'll just point to the corresponding sheet, which is Products. There are a few sheets in this file, but I'm going to select Products. For now, I won't use filters and just pull out all URLs in that file. Now I'll click Execute. Wait, it runs really fast. On the right, in the output section, everything, all the URLs. Here, there are 13 files, 13 items. These are the URLs of those items. The next step is I'll make a call. Take these URLs to make an API call to FireCrawl, so it can scrape the data from those pages. Now I can just copy the part above, so now I'll paste it in here, and I'll connect the Google Sheet node with that HTTP request node, and here, it already has the URL. All the previous configurations remain the same. We can still use exactly this API call, because even though there are 13 items, but we're going to call each API one by one. Meaning for each of these URLs, it will process them sequentially from top to bottom, and each time, it will take this URL and fill it in here to make the API call. So we'll be making 13 API calls in total to FireCrawl. That's basically it. Here, 13 is a bit much, and it's also a bit slow, plus it uses up quite a bit of our credits. For the demo, I'll limit it to 3 items to make it faster. This means it'll take items 2, 3, and 4. So it's only going to take these 3 to use for the next step, which is, it'll call that FireCrawl. So, nothing changes here. We just execute this step. Wait a bit for it to process. It's calling each item one by one. Item 2, item 3, and after it gets all the results, then it'll return them to us. Wait. There, so now it's finished processing. It has scraped out 3 items. We can display the data here. So, these are the 3 items in this table format. Each item will have a lot of information. We can switch to the schema view. Here, with each item, see, it's similar. It has information. From Markdown to metadata too. Content in HTML format. All this information is exactly the same as in the previous step, which is when we scrape data for a single URL. Alright, the next step is that we continue to do this to extract only the data that we need, which is the title, the content, and the URL. So here we run it very quickly, and it returns 3 items. See, with each item, it will extract the corresponding values, this title, the content, and the URL of the website we're scraping. Alright, after we have this information, we just need to update it into the Google Sheet. It will need to match using this URL. That means when it's processed in M8N, the URL that matches with the URL address on the Google Sheet file, it will take the title and the content of this URL to fill it in here. That's all there is to it. Now I'm going to add some Google Sheet nodes. Alright, and here I'll select the action, which is Update Row. And now I'll continue by choosing my account here. For the document part, I'll get the URL address by URL, go back here, copy and paste this, enter it here, and for the sheet, I'll select product and the first sheet. There, so now it will show some additional information. For the mapping column mode, I'll set it to manual so I can manually fill it in below. As for the column to match, meaning which row, which column, we use to match the row to align with the row in Google Sheet with the input item of this node. So, to put it simply, when the value of the URL in the Google Sheet file is equal to the row currently being processed in N8N, then it will update the sorry, I dragged and dropped the wrong one. This should be URL. This is the correct field. So when the field URL in the Google Sheet file is equal to the URL of the row that we are processing, then it will fill in the title, the headline, and the content, which is the content of that URL page. That's it. It's a mechanism that matches by URL, meaning the URL acts as a key. When matched, info fills. I'll run this if I switch here and take a look. It will fill in the information into this Google Sheet file of mine. Why hasn't it filled in yet? There's a little error here. It's the column. To match on that, I forgot to fill in. It should be URL, guys, C, meaning the column we're matching on is URL. All right, now I'll run it again. Now I'll switch over here and wait a bit, and it will automatically find that URL. It's found it. When that URL, MA then, matches the URL in this website file, then it will fill in the title and the content of this web page into this Google Sheet row. There, so we can see here that it has filled in these first three. It's a bit hard to see, yeah, but it's already done those first three. It has filled in the URL, title, and content into the corresponding rows when this URL matches. All right, so just now we have completed a very simple flow. We took a list of URLs from a Google Sheets file. Then we processed each API call to those URLs. So this is the simplest version of the flow. But actually, if we want to be more pro, then we have two ways to handle this, which is scraping data with a list of URLs. I'll probably give a quick intro to both methods. So with this current flow, there's a kind of issue, right? There are two issues. The first issue is when we process multiple items at once, but we call each API one by one. Then we might run into a rate limit issue. It might limit us to in 1 minute. We can only make 50 API calls, that's it. And when we run it like this, it'll keep calling continuously. It just keeps calling nonstop. It finishes running like this and then calls again until everything is processed. So we don't have any mechanism to make it wait, or to handle things so that it can scrape all the data in the list. You see, what if, after 50 runs, it exceeds the limit, then it'll throw an error every time it runs. We're kind of lacking control over it. For example, after each run, if we want to wait about 5 to 10 seconds, where do we add that in? Actually, we can't add it into this flow. Because of the way N8N handles things, it will execute all these steps, meaning, if there are 13 items, it has to process all 13 items. And when it calls the API, it has to call all 13 APIs before it moves on to the next node. Guys, it's not like with item 1, it runs through the whole flow. Item 2, it doesn't work like that in N8N. So, the second issue is that we also lack control over each individual item run. To solve this problem with FireCrawl, there are two ways. The first way is that we can take advantage of a feature that's already built into FireCrawl, which is this batch scrape feature. Let me go back to the documentation. Here, I'll go to the scrape section, and it explains we can scrape multiple URLs at the same time. So, what's the advantage of this? It's that we only need to make a single API call, but within that API call, instead of just providing a single URL, we can give it a list of URLs that we want to scrape, and the result will return all the data from all the URLs that we provided. Yeah. So now, let's go in here and look for the command. This curl command will copy it again, go back to N8N, remove manual trigger connection, and I'll reuse this one. Copy and paste. There, I'll continue connecting it to this flow. So now, instead of calling a single URL, I'll call batch scrape, meaning I'll scrape data from multiple URLs. There, I'll save it and name this with the API. Call as batch scrape. With this, its URL will also change. We can import the URL we just copied into here. We'll import it back in here. See, now we can see that this URL has also changed. But if you import it, it will overwrite the things I've been editing below. So all of these things stay the same except for this endpoint. So thinking about it, I won't copy paste and overwrite anymore. I'll just take this endpoint is for me to update. This is this endpoint. I will write here and I delete the old one. I update this one. That's it. Authentication remains the same. And the body I can still reuse. Always the same. There is only one. I will also have to update this URL to URLs. Guys. Alright, now I'll execute the preview node. It will fetch 3 items from the Google Sheet file, guys, there, so we can see here that it has already fetched them. But if we look at this preview section, we can see that they are still 3 separate items, and it's still making calls one by one to the FireCrawl API 3 times. See, item 1, item 2, item 3. Each time, it only sends one URL address. So, like this, it's not what we want. What we want is to combine those URLs into a single list and send them all, those addresses, into the URLs key. So here, we need to update it a bit, which is, after we have these items, we need to combine these 3 into one. 3 items, item 1, 2, item 3. So now we need to add them all together. And we will select this input field names as URL, put it in here. And for the rename field, I'll change it to URLs. So from 3 items, it will become just one item. But in this one item, it will contain all 3 URLs. See? It changed the format to exactly what we need. You could call it an array, and in that array there will be multiple values. Here, each value is a string. So we just need that extra step. After consolidation into one, it will just take this one URL address to make the API call only. There, so now we can preview here that it's not receiving it correctly yet because I changed name URL, so add an S here. Sorry, an S here. There you go. So right away, you can see that it has recognized this variable. I can enlarge it a bit for you to see. There, so now this URL is already a whole list of URLs that we want to scrape. So now, instead of scraping one at a time, feeding it each one individually to scrape, I'll give it the entire list to scrape at once. There, and now we'll execute this step. So this immediately returns the result and confirms is true, but we don't see any data yet. Actually, when we send a batch like this, we're creating a crawl job on FireCrawl, and it will execute that job over a period of time, so we'll need to wait a bit for it to finish. There's also a way for us to check on that job. We already have the ID and its URL, so we just need to call this job, that's all. In the documentation, they also explain this, that when we can call an endpoint and add the ID of that job, it will check for us, and it will return the data. So now I'll continue. Okay? By now, it's definitely finished running, but just to be safe, we can add a wait button. If scraping, we can wait longer, 5 to 10 seconds or even. On a more advanced level, we could design a webhook so that when the scraping job is done, it will notify us like, hey, I finished scraping. Now you can call that job ID to get the data. So here, I'll just wait, say, 5 or 10 seconds as an example. Now it's finished running, and now I need to create another HTTP request node. There, and I'll add it here. I'll call the URL, which is the endpoint along with the job ID from the previous step. I'll do the previous step. For this one, I'll change the name a bit to scrape multiple URLs with FireCrawl. There, I'll leave the name like this so it's accurate. Okay. Alright, now for this HTTP request, I'll also change it to get crawl job, or maybe let's call it get data from FireCrawl. Why doesn't this auto-save anymore? Get data from FireCrawl. Now I have to press enter for it to save. Anyway. Alright, the method. I'll execute the previous node to get this URL. we can drag and drop it. We also add authentication. This credential type, this header, then select FireCrawl. No need to add any other parameters. When we execute this step, it will check this job ID, and it will fetch all the data. So, the result returned from the batch scrape, what does it look like? It looks like this. Here's the data. I'll show you the schema format. Since it scraped 3 URLs, it counts the credit as 3, and it's finished 3. And with the data part, we can see that it will be inside a key, which is data. Here's the data. 0, data 1, data 2. For each of these objects, it's the data scraped from URL pages. There are 3, numbered 0, 1, and 2. So anyway, each of these is a piece of data that was scraped from each page. Alright, now next I have to continue by breaking it down from one item. Now I will split it into 3 items. Then show the data up here. From one item, I'll split it into 3. The field I'm breaking apart is this data field, and I'll export. Then it will split into 3 items for me, and each item is exactly the content on each URL. There are 3 URL addresses, so now it's been split into 3, and with these 3, each one will have information to move to the next step. When we get to the edit step, I'll filter those out. Only the information I need. Here, it's still not receiving anything, because this expression has changed. Right now, it's showing undefined, so I'll need to adjust it a bit, because now it no longer starts with data anymore, but instead it's metadata. I have to delete this data part, and I can delete this, and then drag and drop it again. Okay, I'll look for the title again. Here, the title is inside the metadata, so you can notice that we'll need to delete the data part. There, once you delete it, it'll get the correct input result. It's already changed. We'll need to tweak it a bit, so it receives the new data. I check the preview here, and I see it's correct now. PD1, PD2, item 0, 1, 2, that's right, it's changed. Alright, now I'll execute. Similarly, it's formatted nicely again for each item, so it only returns just the fields that we need. Now, next, in this Google Sheet part, there's nothing that needs to be changed. It stays the same. We still continue to match to align using the value of the URL, so when the value in this file's URL matches the value of the row being processed in N8N is equal to each other, then it will update the title and content there. So you just execute it. I'm still processing the 3 old rows, so it will update those 3 old rows. Ideally, I should have selected the next row. Anyway, that's it. That's all there is to it. It has already recognized the address, URL, and it has updated it into the URL file. So this is the first way, which is to use the batch scrape feature of FireCrawl. We will compile the list into just a single string to send to FireCrawl. Then after receiving the results, we will split them out into individual items to process them one by one, and we fill them into the sheet file. So that's the first method. The second method is to use a loop, where we will process each item one by one, which means we will reuse this part. Guys, I'll copy it here. But instead of running it continuously like this, I'll set it up for each individual item, putting it inside a loop. I need to add a loop. When I run this node, it will pull out 13 items, right? It will fetch all the rows from this Google Sheet file. Similarly, I'll set a limit. Now I'll set the limit to the last 3 items. These last 3 are different, so their URLs are also different for each of these items. Instead of just pushing them in and processing like this, I'll put them into a loop. This loop item, that means I'll process each item one by one with a batch size of 1. Now I'll delete this to tidy things up a bit so it's easier for you to see. So basically, what does this loop do? It means I'll run through each item in this loop. It will take this URL, then call FireCrawl, clean things up, extract only the data it needs. After that, update Google Sheet file. That's it, changes. After finishing each item, I might add a wait node here. Set it to wait 5 seconds. After processing, it waits 5 seconds before moving on to process the next item. Now I'll drag it back, bring it back into this loop. So this is how you create a loop. And we specify which steps each item has to go through. Then after it's done processing item 1, it goes back to item 2, item 3. That's all there is to it, and now I'll try running this. Okay, I'll execute. How do I execute just one step at a time? I'll press this button, right? I'll run it up to this step. There, now it's already pulled out one item. I can open this up to show you. It's pulled out one item with row number 12. This is the URL. After that, it scrapes the data, puts it into the node. Edit to extract only needed fields. It updates this Google Sheet, then waits. It processed the first item. For example, looking at the last 3 rows. So these are the last 3 rows here. This interface is a bit hard to look at, but these are the last 3 rows here. So it's processed according to this numbering method. So here is the 12th row, there, and it's already fetched the title and content of this page into here, right guys? Now, if I keep running it, it'll fetch all 3 of these, the last 3 rows. Now I'll run it again, let it process. This one processes quickly, sequentially from item 1 to 3. You can see that it's already finished processing item 1. Now it's going to a few seconds, and now it's moved on to item 2. 2 items are done. Now it's moving on to item 3. For item 3, it continues to process an order. It calls the API, retrieves the necessary fields, and updates them into the Google Sheet. Now I'll go back to this spreadsheet file to check. So you can see that, indeed, the last 3 rows of this spreadsheet file have been processed, row 13 and row 12. It's taken the address. The URL from this performed data scraping, then updated and added the information we need back into this Google Sheet file. So what do you think? That's another way, which is using a loop. Actually, this is the more common way because the batch process isn't available. But this loop is a feature that's built into N8N, and it allows us, when we have a list with many items, a list that needs to be processed, we can put it into a loop to process each item one by one, and with each item, we have full control to decide how we want to process it, which nodes to use, and if necessary, we can even add some delays between each processing step, for example, to avoid API rate limit errors. And now, I'll save it here. Okay, so in this section, I've shown you how to build a simple system so we can scrape data using just a Google Sheet file where we update the list of URLs into a Google Sheet, and then we've built flows in N8N to process, starting from the most basic task of scraping data for a single URL to scraping data for multiple URLs, and then saving the returned data into each row in the Google Sheet. So we've completed 3 simple exercises here, numbered 1, 2, and 3. We continue to level up the problem with exercises that are a bit more challenging, which are exercise 4 and 5. Exercise 4 is where we'll scrape data from a list of URLs. But instead of saving it to a Google Sheet file, which can be a bit hard to read, we'll create a Google Doc file on Drive, and then we'll pour the data we scraped into that Google Drive file. Each Drive file will correspond to a single URL, so that way we'll be able to process the content scraped into the Drive file, and it'll have a nicer interface. The video you're watching is a part of the course on RAG Chatbot for Businesses. I'm still recording and finishing content for this course. Although the main focus of the course is on building the system, RAG Chatbot for Businesses, I think the data scraping part is also quite important, since it's in the very first step, which is preparing the data, building the knowledge base for the chatbot for you guys. So I've also added some extra knowledge about data scraping into this course for you. The video you're watching right now is a part of the course content. So if any of you are interested in building a RAG chatbot that you can apply in your business so it can fetch information and answer questions based on your own knowledge base, your company's knowledge base, then you can read more information about my course. Yeah. So these are just a few pieces of content that I've selected to upload to YouTube. But of course, the course content won't be fully uploaded. Only those of you who purchase the course will have access to the content that I've developed in that course. Okay, so in this video, I've guided you through building a system for basic data scraping with a Google interface sheet where we can so that it can retrieve information and fill that information into the Google Sheet file. So this is also a relatively long video. If you're still here, watching up to this point, I really appreciate it. If you've learned something from this video of mine, please give me a like and leave a comment below to let me know. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.